So, also a very warm welcome from my side, and I want to express my thanks to the keynote speakers who already gave us an insight of the social dimension as a field in the higher education politics. I'm very happy to welcome Nino Schmidt, Pietro Forchi, Florian Rampelt, and Andrea Dorothea Bührmann. Welcome. First, before I give you the floor to introduce yourself and the organization you're speaking for and the topics we're going to talk about, I will first introduce myself and the organization on behalf. I am moderating this session on the social dimension. I'm Nathalie Schäfer, a student from Frankfurt, and I was a former president of the German Students' Union, a freier Zusammenschluss von Studentinnenschaften. And this organization, the German Students' Union, is a member of a greater and bigger organization, the European Students' Union, which is fighting for students' rights since 1982 and is an organization with 45 members of 39 countries. So, tell me, who are you? And what is the topic you're going to talk about?
Yes, thanks for this introduction. My name is Andrea Dorothea Bührmann. I'm the Vice President of the University of Göttingen in Germany. I'm responsible for studying, learning, and equal opportunities. And moreover, I'm the director of the Diversity Research Institute at our university. And I'm very happy to be here.
My name is Florian Rampelt. I'm the German number 3 in this round. Don't know what that has to do with diversity, but I'm also from Germany, from Berlin. I'm working for a project called Hochschulforum Digitalisierung. We're supporting German higher education institutions with their digitalization agendas and strategies. And I do have quite a background in refugee-focused education. This is why I'm also on the panel on the social dimension of higher education.
Thank you, Natalie, for these introductory remarks. I'm Nino Schmidt. I'll start with the fact that I'm co-chairing the BFUG Advisory Group for Social Dimension for the period 18-20. And we have a quite ambitious task for this period because we would like to produce a new strategic document called Principles and Guidelines for Social Dimension that should guide countries in the European higher education area to improve and to structure in a better way social dimension policies. In my home country, I'm the founder of the Institute for the Development of Education in Zagreb, in Croatia, where I serve as executive director. And in the past 20 years, the Institute has become, in my opinion, the leading higher education policy think tank in Southeastern Europe, and our main areas of expertise lie with the social dimensions of higher education, financing, and quality enhancement. And I'll finish with something that I think we'll discuss further here. My organization is leading a pan-European project that produces a European framework for community engagement in higher education. So while actions that link universities and their environment is not a novelty, we believe that community engagement in higher education is really a new way how higher education is structuring its relations with the wider world. So the framework should actually help universities demonstrate how they deliver public benefits. And this is the topic that I think we will have the chance to further discuss.
Thank you very much, Natalie, and thank you to the Secretariat for having me over. My name is Pietro Focchi, and I'm a European citizen, surprisingly born and raised in Bologna, which makes me very excited about all of this event and so many international inputs hosted by my hometown. I'm privileged enough to say I do encompass different sectors of the society. First, of course, civil society as young student of the University of Bologna and part of a variety of students-led organizations. I do represent and I'm part of the public sector as well, as I'm currently the youth delegate of Italy to the United Nations, which is a mandate by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Italy. And then at the age of 22, I did embark on the crazy adventure of social entrepreneurship with Eduactive, which is a very young enterprise, social enterprise, therefore part of private sector or third sector, the way we want to say it, which works toward the internationalization of Italian youngsters, mainly high schoolers, of course, in the perspective of accessing later on higher education.
As we already heard from the keynote speakers, and 10 years ago at the London communique, the ministers agreed on the sentence or the goal that the ministers share the social aspiration that the student body entering, participating and completing higher education at all levels should reflect the diversity of the population. Still, this goal remains unfulfilled, and you, Florian, told us about the digitalization as a tool for the social dimension. What contribution can digital solutions make to strengthening the social dimension of the higher education?
I believe that digital technology can be much better used for a forward-looking higher education that is taking much more into consideration the social dimension of higher education. There are great opportunities, but of course there are also great challenges, and I would like to briefly talk about both sides of it. As a background, maybe we have just recently published a white paper called Bologna Digital 2020 that takes up a few of the remarks I'm going to make now, but also goes far deeper into other aspects that are relevant for the Bologna process, at least we believe. The first chapter of that white paper is on what we call PAT, Preparation, Admission and Transition. This is about opening up higher education with the use of digital technologies. Before I joined the organization that I'm working with now, I worked with Chiron Open Higher Education, which was or is still a startup trying to enable refugees to access higher education through the use of online courses and online guidance. Some key learnings, and we're going to write about that in our paper for the conference proceedings also. Some key learnings are that especially for what we heard before with the two panelists who gave their keynotes, for the question of orientation and guidance for vulnerable students who are not that well connected to university, digital technologies can help to empower them to get to know what higher education is all about. This starts far before a student actually enters the actual institution. So I believe digital technology can really help students be better informed about what is expected of them. We called our chapter Preparation, Admission and Transition because we also have to make clear that as soon as you're admitted to a higher education institution, the journey is not over. It's a lot about also remaining within the institution, about reducing dropouts. I believe that we have to be much more courageous within the European higher education area to make use of digital technologies, also to offer better guidance for students who are already within an institution. Of course, there is also a downside towards the use of digital technologies. What we found out when we worked with refugees is that what I say, blended learning is the better online learning. There is a lot of promise around that online learning could help democratizing higher education. And I think that very often does not fulfill the standards that it is setting. Especially when we look at vulnerable students, we have to make sure that online offerings, digital support is only one step within a student journey that still has to focus a lot on on-campus personal interaction of students with students, students with teachers, and all the other stakeholders that are able to support student success in a way that we really, really strengthen the social dimension of higher education. The last point I want to make is we are here at a conference that was called Bologna Process Beyond 2020. I think no matter how you stand on digital technologies and which opportunities you see, which challenges you emphasize, digitalization is a reality, and we have to make use of this reality in order to discuss in a more future-oriented way how we want to shape European higher education. So far, and I don't want to spoil the party, but so far I did not see that many visions in the last day. So I think digital technology can also be a catalyst for enabling us to discuss in a more visionary manner what higher education should look like.
Thank you very much. Andrea, talking about the achieving the value of diversity of the student body. How, in achieving this diversity, can diversity research institution improve this value?
I think we improve this in two ways. The one thing is to make clear that there is no diversity, but we observe diversity. And it's interesting that which dimensions of diversity we make relevant or not. And this is part of the game to do research, I think. And the other part is to advise my university. We have invented or conceptualized a so-called inclusive and transformative diversity strategy. Inclusive means we do not want only to represent our demographics in our student body. I think this wouldn't work because I'm coming from Göttingen, and Göttingen is a very academic little city, I would say. I think it's not about the social stuff we talked about. The other thing is we want to be transformative. We want to transform our little region in the middle, not of nowhere, but in Germany, to become more diverse. And so we have a network together with other organizations in our region who signed the Diversity Charter. And we try to build up a network and to become a hub, to be an inclusive organization and an inclusive region. This is what we try to do and to help.
Talking about the inclusiveness of region and in the sense of being inclusive also towards the sphere of outside of the higher education. And first, I want to ask Pedro, what value of multi-stakeholders and the partnership of higher education can benefit for higher education as such, and also in the context of the society.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Multi-stakeholder partnerships are crucial, and I do believe they are one of the answers to many sides and to many shades, to some hardship higher education institutions sometimes face. We are used generally to exchange and to build up bilateral partnerships. They're easier. University on one side and another stakeholder/another sector of the society involved in a roundtable, in a discussion, in a conversation, in setting up a research program, and so on and so forth. Newer generations are probably the most communicative generations right now, and our ability as students go really, really far and beyond and spread as a net. Therefore, thinking, and this is just what I would like all of the people present here attending to think about and to focus a little bit, is building up more on multi-stakeholder partnerships, involving more than just one sector, of course, to support the research and the teaching activity of any higher education institutions, but also to serve the public good, to be integrated in the social fabric of the university itself, but also in a broader social fabric, which encompasses and includes people that are not familiar with the institutions, with the higher education institution itself. Just like as many curious people are stepping in this building on these days. Therefore, this is just my take coming from the experience of international organizations on a side, therefore, public sector, on the will and the ability and the need of youngsters and of students to go over, to be curious, and not just to exchange with one other party, one other counterparty.
So, speaking about community engagement, why do you think, or why is it becoming increasingly important that higher educations encourage with the community stakeholders on the mutually beneficial joint activities?
Thank you, Natalie, for asking this. So maybe just a short introduction and something connected what we've heard also in the keynotes. Since 1980s, there has been increasing policy pressure on universities to deliver service mission or what was called third mission activities beyond teaching and research, through which they could contribute to the societal development. However, we all know that the emphasis within third mission activities was predominantly on contributing to knowledge economy through business engagement, innovation, entrepreneurship, and not so much on community engagement. And this is really the reason why many universities have failed to develop infrastructures to translate the knowledge that they produce into tangible benefits for the wider community. We believe that today there is community engagement is emerging as a policy priority. And we see it, for instance, in the renewed agenda of the European Commission. And they have one of the priorities related to the community engagement, and they say that higher education must play its part in facing up to Europe's social and democratic challenges, and that it should engage by integrating local, regional, and societal issues into curriculum, into research, and into teaching. So with this rise of widening or community engagement agenda, I believe that there is a clear need to help universities institutionalize cooperation with their wider communities. And on the other side, to inform policymakers on the value of such engagement. However, we have not seen an initiative on the European higher education area that has focused primarily on community engagement. And I think that there is a clear opportunity that we now fill this empty space, so to say.
May I ask you a little bit more on this? How do you think that the higher education institutions really can work together with the communities?
Interesting question. I think that we should discuss it throughout the day. But I think that we should stick to 5 key principles, so to say. First, I think that we should be committed to the authentic and mutually beneficial relations. So we need a genuine partnerships between community and university stakeholders, as opposed to having universities being the primary benefactor, or that university acts as a charitable donor. Second, I think that we should empower individual actors within and outside universities. It means that we need to recognize and award engagement practices of academics, of students, of community representatives. And we need to hear their stories. And as Chris has mentioned at the beginning, I think we should display these stories very visibly. Third, I think that there is a need to support bottom-up more than top-down steering. Fourth, I think it is important that we speak about collaborative learning at the university or between academics and students and community, rather than having a comparison of competitive performance. So we would like to create a learning journey that would motivate university engagement practices rather than creating a mechanism for ranking universities. And the last, 5th principle, I think that the community engagement is very much an area for the development of the university. And I think that we should frame it not only through social justice perspective, because it is really community engagement is much wider. It actually includes engaged research, innovation, excellent science, responsible teaching and learning. It opens and widens opportunities for access and participation. So if we frame it as an area for the development, I think that universities have a chance to demonstrate how they can deliver public benefits in all key areas of their work.
Pedro, I saw you are nodding a lot. Going in line with what he said, I'm going to ask you with the idea of the future, how we can create an inclusion of the youth in the role of the higher education value for the achievements of the agenda until 2030.
Thank you very much. I will connect to my fellow panelists points on development. We are all very much aware of the centrality and the relevance of the Agenda 2030, which for the first time from 2015 all the way to hopefully 2030 with great achievements has the feature of unitarity. For the first time, it's an overall plan which requires every single goal to be achieved in order to achieve the entire agenda on one side. And on the other side, the United Nations, the member states, we are all part of, the majority of us is part of, required and called different actors, finally, to be included into the conversations and to be change makers and main actors for the achievement of the 17 goals. And from this perspective, and my capacity of youth delegate as a social entrepreneur and as a critical thinker, thanks also to my university, my alma mater, I tried to find out where was my role inside the agenda. And I didn't have to go that far for finding out that I was personally touched by all the 17 goals and about 90 targets out of the 169 targets of the agenda. And that really helped me realizing that we as students, as youngsters, we're not the future. I personally disagree with the idea that we are the future. Of course we are the future, but we want to be the present. We don't want anymore an extra chair at the table. We want the table of decision making, the table of monitoring, the table of measuring performance of the community we're a part of to be deconstructed and rebuilt with real inclusion from this side. And I think the creative power and the originality which starts from our daily learning within the university and our freedom of thinking from our European identity on one side and from our young age, and sometimes us as students being a little bit naive as well, could be a great asset for the university to be for its betterment more generally. And in this frame of the inclusion of youngsters, beside the institutional representation through the regular processes that are sometimes are working, sometimes are not working within a university, I think it's very important to use the SDGs not as a nice advertisement, because they're colorful and they cover all of the main areas of researching for any university, but as a standard to start from, and as a standard even to put into the discussion what works and what doesn't.
So besides being a student representative, you would also strive for example, a more involvement of youngsters, of students in creating the curricula of the higher education institutions and being more involved in the whole decision-making part.
I'd say it's not just decision-making, is making sure the university is open and is lived by its people, and it's also open to people from the outside that are not researchers, that are not teachers, they're not professors, and they're not even students of that of that university. I think this is the only way to ensure the centrality and also somehow even the accountability within the social fabric of the university. And I mean, I'm just starting from my personal experience. I didn't really feel part of my university at the very beginning of my bachelor first. And then I found ways behind and beyond my curriculum to include myself and to be included. And now it's not because of my role of youth delegates, but I'm making a lot, I'm publishing. I did access the rector's office, which is not something that usual or common in such a big university as ours. And I think everyone should feel within a city, within a county, within a region, the importance of the university being there and being open even for questions, open for visitors, sharing the heritage and innovating even the narrative around the university. I believe it's very important, and I believe it can happen only through empowering as much as the higher institutions can students.
I just quickly would like to add something to that, because a point that is very crucial to the work that we do, we have an initiative called Digital Change Makers, where we try to empower students, but students in a totally different role. I think it should not only be about the student having access to the rector's office. It should be about the student being accessed by the rector. It should be about the student being a facilitator of innovation processes where university stakeholders are willing to come. And this is a different role. When you really talk about innovative processes, more agile university development, the student is at the center and the rector is happy to go to the student and work with him. And I think it is very important to emphasize that. I would be very happy that, for example, next time we do not only have such panel discussions where a student is moderating it and asking pre-described questions, but where students are facilitating co-creation processes, where we really create new innovative solutions, especially when we talk about social innovation. I really think the role of students can be much stronger than we currently discuss it. And it can be much stronger when we talk about the social innovation that we need.
Andrea, you want to go on because you were showing facial
Yes,
expression
I
of
would
love,
like
maybe
to
going
add something. What's the name in English? The Hochschulforum does also peer-to-peer review thing in Göttingen, and now we have the student actors, and they are. I'm happy to meet them, and they are not coming to my office. This is very interesting, but I want to add another thing. I think we have to think about our types or formations of teaching and learning. And there is the so-called service learning or the community-based research. And I think we should use this type of teaching and learning to make clear that not only our researchers have responsibilities to society, but also students. And I think it's very interesting to find out, for me at least in the city of Göttingen and the University of Göttingen, we are doing research on the diversity of the city of Göttingen, and the students are very happy to have a link, a closer relationship to the city of Göttingen, not also only the university. And the managers of the city of Göttingen, they are very happy to have an idea what's going on with the students, because, you know, Göttingen has at about 100,000 inhabitants, and more than 35 are students. And they are very interested to come to a closer contact. And I think a lot of universities and cities around them have a great interest and could have great benefit to come into a closer relationship.
So I have still a question about the digitalization part, because you were describing digitalization as something that can actually create a sphere and a culture or a surrounding where this communication is fruitful and is doable. How do you think that digitalization can improve working and learning conditions without replacing already existing support systems?
I didn't get the second part of the question.
Yes, without replacing already existing support mechanisms and systems.
By complementing it, of course. I believe, it's crucial. Digitalization is not a tool in order to recreate wrong pedagogies that were already not fruitful and effective within university. I think if we start talking about digitalization and digital technologies, we should start looking at the learner and the needs of the learner. So when I was first working at the University of Passau, as a research assistant, and I tried to change a lot for teacher education students, but only when I started to join a startup, I learned what user-centered design actually means, what personas are, what design thinking is. So I believe one of the greatest benefits of the whole discourse on digital innovation is that it can help us rethinking how we approach education. And that only ends with the technology. It doesn't start with the technology, it starts with the learner. The second point is coming back to the London communique. I think one major aspect is more flexible learning pathways that have been described within that communique as well. That definitely is a very important aspect of digital learning opportunities. So we do have a diverse student population that is in need of flexible ways into higher education, but also flexible ways through higher education. My colleague Dominic Oro, who some of you might know, working on the social dimension for quite some years, recently published a study called Ahead 2030, where he described a Lego system of smaller learning units building up to the whole learning experience and qualifications. So I think when we talk about digital learning opportunities, we also need to talk about micro-content and smaller learning units. One recommendation that we are discussing in our white paper, Bologna Digital 2020, is a fifth cycle, a qualification framework for micro-credentials. And some other European stakeholders have discussed such approaches before. I believe that we definitely need to rethink after 20 years if the approaches that we have developed within the European higher education area, but also amongst other stakeholders within the European Union, which is smaller, have to be rethought and maybe innovated. Last but not least, I would like to claim that I believe, and that always was my claim, I call myself a quality assurance enthusiast. I was one of the students who were happy enough to be involved in quality assurance as student representatives from a very, very early stage. This is when I got to like the Bologna process because I could tick boxes and tell university rectors what was right or not. I believe that we have to look at the Bologna tools that have been developed. I like many of them, but we need to innovate them, and we need to be courageous enough to make use of what has been developed in the last 20 years in terms of the European higher education area being an enabler, not a gatekeeper. When I was a student myself, when I started 10 years ago, I perceived Bologna tools as a hurdle towards my education. Only now, through digital and social innovation that I was confronted with, I found out pathways how to perceive Bologna and its tools as enablers, and I think that can really be supported by digital technologies.
So, Nino, how do you see how we can put the social dimension, as already described, on the political agenda for 2020 and on the agenda of Rome 2020?
I think that I have maybe already answered that question earlier because as Florian has mentioned right now, I see a clear need that community engagement, civic engagement should be included in the Bologna process after 2020, because all these instruments and tools that have been developed within Bologna, they're important, and we need to continue to enhance them. However, I think that now, after 2020, we clearly need something that I would call more human dimension of the Bologna. And I think that it can be delivered through what I call and define community engagement, because this is really what could help both policymakers on the state side or at the universities to demonstrate how they deliver public benefits. And I think that it's great that we have active students, that we have examples of service learning, Andrea, as you have mentioned. But I think that we need to think how we can connect or interconnect that all digital agenda inside one institution. So that's why we are developing a European framework that could interconnect all these agents and that could help institutions basically to travel from one-dimensional to multidimensional actions, from something that is superficial to something that is embedded, from transactional approaches to transformational, from collaborative betterment to collaborative empowerment. And I clearly see an opportunity that we could incorporate somehow in the Bologna after 2020.
Thank you very much. I have a last and a very short question to all of the panelists, and it's just a yes and no question. So we are in the social dimension panel, and the social dimension is looking upon the Bologna process only one small part, always giving just a small part. Would you see, well, we are now in Bologna. Bologna lies on the way from Paris to Rome, of course, and also in the time frame we're in the middle of the Bologna process. Would you see the importance to push the social dimension this far or further, that it becomes as important as a third cycle system, the recognition as the Lisbon recognition and the quality assurance in the EHEA?
May I start? I think you are right, and I want to mention a new approach. It's called the capability approach. I think some of you know this. It's conceptualized by Zen and Martha Nussbaum, and they make the difference between functions and capabilities. And capabilities are real opportunities to function. And I think this will be very important. We can have a lot of objectives in our Bologna process or statements, but we have to have a look at are these functions also capabilities for the students, for the researchers, and I would like to add this big part of people working at universities. I call them the people, the management, but also the people working at the administration. I think we have to think also about them, to make them happy with us, who wants to become more inclusive. Thank you.
I would also say yes, and like to emphasize, even when it becomes more important and as important as other aspects, we need to approach it, and it can be maybe the change maker to approaching it in a different way and trying out new formats to developing policies, developing solutions throughout the European higher education area.
So, speaking about social dimension, I think it is important that we start speaking about social dimensions, so plural. And I think that it has to be wider than only the social justice agenda. I think that we should be aware that there is a clear opportunity for the development through social innovations, through interconnect all the actors at the university and then the university with the community. And I think that this responsiveness and this interaction between university and its environments should be somehow the future area of development of European universities.
And I would say social dimensions should be perceived and dealt with as aiming at social sustainability, which is something most of times we do forget about social sustainability because of course it's harder to measure and it's longer run rather than economic sustainability for an institution. Of course we have the emergency of environmental sustainability as well, but then we can close all of those into social sustainability. And I would say it's very, very relevant for an institution to ask itself what is the real impact it has and this, within its social fabric. And sometimes the answer is not pleasant. However, it's still very, very important to start or to continue a conversation involving really everyone.
Thank you very much. I would now open up the question and answer part towards the audience, and I would suggest to gather 2 or 3 questions and then let the panelists answer.
Hello, thank you very much, panel, for that interesting discussion. A lot of what we've talked about this morning has focused on barriers to education for non-traditional students, barriers of getting in, barriers of staying there once they're at the institution, and indeed the barriers they face upon graduation. I was wondering, in the panel's thoughts, on developing the content of the curricula to be more inclusive and relevant to the wide variety and diversity of students that we're seeing these days.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you very much for your contribution. My question is linked to barriers as well, but they say that depart from an anecdote that happened to me very recently. I just came back from a couple of years spent abroad in the UK. I'm now based at the University of Bologna, and recently I was basically in touch with a French institution. The idea was to create an Erasmus agreement between the University of Bologna and this French institution. And then I stumbled upon a detail in the conversation I had. This institution was pointing out that an extra fee, a conspicuous extra fee of even 2,000 euros was going to be actually requested, collected from students that possibly could travel from Bologna into these French institutions. And I have now to, let's say, meet with my department director and other colleagues to discuss whether or not this is an appropriate fee and an appropriate thing for our students. So going back to the basics of inclusion within established areas of inclusion, right? The Erasmus program. I would be very curious to get to know your feedback about this. And sorry for being provocative, but what do you think about charging, between speech mark, Erasmus students when they come into a foreign university that is supposed instead to welcome them and make them integrated into the social fabric of a society? Thank you very much.
So I think we can already start to answer. Does somebody you want to take a floor?
Yes, I would like to answer your question. I think you are right. We have to think about our content, especially in this post-colonial times, I think, and especially coming from Germany in this times where the new right people are, or the fraction is growing. And I think it's very important to think about our content of curricula. And not only with a glance to the social sciences or humanities, but also to the natural sciences and the life sciences, I think.
I would like to add to that. Yeah, of course, I fully agree. Also, your reference to colonial times, I used to work with teacher education students, and it was sometimes shocking what geography students, for example, what kind of concepts they were still taught in 2015. I also believe that more inclusive content can be achieved in a joint and collaborative approach. I believe if we have more transparency on teaching content, which can be achieved with open educational resource practices within universities. This is a challenge for many lecturers as they do not want their resources to be openly available, but it can help to support each other in developing content that is that is more inclusive and that is up to date, so to say.
Of course, I do agree with all of the fellow panelists. I would just like to stress out the fact that when it comes to content, it would be very important, and it happens sometimes, to include within the teaching activity with a planned strategy, of course, local realities the university is part of, representatives of professional realities, aligned, of course, with the curriculum, but also representatives of institutions and civil society representatives. The last ones are most often excluded from the academic teaching activity. And I'm referring to NGOs, I'm referring to social enterprises, I'm referring to established communities that every city has, and they do add a great value to the community. So including them within the teaching curriculum somehow, of course without substituting teachers, I think would start a very virtuous circle and help the university opening itself and being more present within its social dimensions.
I probably try to answer through the both questions through informing you what we are doing at the moment in our BFUG advisory group for social dimension, because we are trying to help at one side universities and on the other side systems, so governments, to find some solutions of the problems that we've heard. So I mentioned that we are creating a document, principles and guidelines for the social dimensions, and they will have two parts. One part will be recommendations or principles related to government, so how they can improve their policies. And on the other side, there will be principles and guidelines for higher education institutions. So I would just like to stress that when we now create principles for higher education institutions, that we really take very much on how to provide recommendations on how to create inclusive curriculum, but not only inclusive curriculum, also inclusive research, inclusive assessment, how to engage students, how to engage staff, how to establish links with the communities. So this is all very important, like all to interconnect all these elements, not like having only inclusive learning, because it will not probably solve the problem. The problem is more complex, and we need actually go more in depth and to find solutions that will provide a holistic answers. On the other side, I mean, speaking about higher education institutions, of course, we also tackle the problem on how to improve policies. So it's more, so we use both top-down and bottom-up approach. And the same is for the principles and guidelines for the systems, for higher education systems, where we try to recommend how we could improve like policies, and primarily the policies related to access, participation, completion, and also policies that are related to financing. And the question related to Erasmus students, we know that most vulnerable are really like underrepresented, disadvantaged and students, because if they would like to be mobile, they face really the biggest obstacles. So we really try to recommend and to find solutions how we could change this situation, and we will definitely try to find the solutions also on the problem that we've heard.
Would you? Yes, there are more questions. I see one in the back.
Thank you very much. Yes, first of all, I would like to add with what was Nina. I'm Robert Napier, I'm the president-elect of ESU, and I'm co-chairing the group on social dimension together with Nino. And just to continue, one last line about what was being said is the fact that also we're highlighting the importance of governments actually consulting with higher education institutions, because there's this particular role that we cannot propose changes to higher education institutions without also the proper consultation and involvement of HEIs. And maybe a general question to the panel, maybe Nino excluded because we've already discussed this between us, is One of the tasks of the advisory group is to look into the question of what social dimension actually mean within this sphere. And what we discussed is that the definition of the institutions reflecting the diversity of society is a good definition of the social dimension. But my question to the panelists is, do you think that such a description, such an understanding of the social dimension can bring about quantitative and qualitative changes in the near future? Is it enough as a basis to improve the social dimension of higher education?
I would like to reply to your first part because I didn't really get the second one, and I think my colleagues maybe also. So maybe you can ask the second question again, but I would really like to emphasize one aspect. You said governments must consult HEIs. I don't believe that is the best approach. I think HEIs must be consulted, but we should have peer-to-peer approaches. We do that on the topic of digitalization in Germany. The European University Association also has some programs, I believe also on the social dimension. It is the case that there are great innovators out there already, that we have universities such as University of Göttingen who have developed approaches towards a more social-oriented or community-oriented HEI. So I believe the most effective way is not governments consulting HEIs, but peer-to-peer approaches where HEIs consult each other on eye level. And the second question, I don't know if someone else got it, yeah.
Sorry, there's quite a bit of feedback, so I'm hearing myself after I speak. At the moment when we speak of the social dimension, we look at the definition that within the institutions, within the education system, there should be a student population that reflects the diversity of community. And this is the definition that has quite a long standing within the Bologna process. And my question is, do you think that such definition is actually enough to bring about changes and to be able to follow up on how much progress we are making in this regard?
And now I get it. I think no. I think numbers are very important. And as a woman, I have to admit, for me, it's very important to have all the same chances than men. And in Europe, you know, women are discriminated against, and I know this because of the numbers. But I think to change things, I think this does not work only with numbers. You have to change the mindset of the people. They have to see that this could be a win-win situation for them. And I mentioned before, Göttingen, it doesn't work to reflect the inhabitants in our student body. But what I think is we have to make clear that we are part of a diverse student body or professor, faculty or staff, because diversity is not only the marked ones, the women, the transgender, the disabled, and so on. We are all part of the diversity community, because it doesn't make sense to say, oh, you are religious, and then you have to think of, you are not. And so it's a very close relationship, and I think we have to make up our mind, what's our idea of justice? And I tried to mention or to bring in the capability approach, because it's not about to treat everyone in the same way, but in the same they need to become able to do things. And I think this would be important.
I would like to add a small aspect. Reflecting the diversity of the community is also not sufficient, because as you said, this is very much only about numbers and percentages. It's, for me, community engagement. We had that a lot. It's also about taking into consideration or making sure that ideas and needs of that of a diverse community is also part of university development processes. And there we come back to strategy development and all the other aspects. It's very easy to rest when you have the right numbers, and it's much more difficult to integrate a diversity of ideas. And I really liked that part of the keynote, that the first keynote we had today. It's the diversity of people and ideas, and that has to be very much emphasized.
There is another question.
So on that point, I was the speaker this morning. I wanted to not ask a question, but respond to a question that you asked, Chairperson. You asked, how can we put the social dimensions of higher education on the political agenda? And the thing about politicians is that they would like to be elected or re-elected. And they are elected or re-elected by people. So if you can convince the people, the society around you, nationally, globally, if we can convince the people that we are an integral part of society, the politics will follow. And that is not just a general statement, it has very practical implications. Does your university, for example, does your university have a portfolio of case studies of the work that you have done in the community? If I went to your central office and I asked, please show me the documents with the case studies of the work that you've done in the community, would you be able to give me one? Do you have it on your website? When I served at Newcastle in England for about 10 years, and there I devised something which I call the taxi driver test. The taxi driver test is like this. When I fly into a city and I take a taxi and I say to the taxi driver, can you take me to the university? Will the taxi driver know not only where the university is, but what the university does? Taxi drivers know a lot of stuff. If you want to know anything about the city, you ask a taxi driver. So, unless and until the taxi driver and the shop assistant and the hairdresser and the bus driver will be able to tell any visitor what is done at the university, we will have failed that test. And if we fail that test, then the politics will be impossible. So, convince the people, and then the politics will follow. Thank you.
If somebody wants to take the floor.
They're going to.
Okay.
There's one more question.
One more question. Okay, I think it will also be the last one because we have to finish really on time because one panelist has to catch her flight. And so, yes, thank you.
Yeah, I'm Rafael Bonete from University of Salamanca, Spain, and ANECA. A very short question. Are we better now than 20 years ago in the field of social dimension? Are we going to be better in 10 years? Because I'm not sure we are better now. And I don't see why we are going to be better in 10 years ahead. Thank you.
Thanks for this question, and I'm the panelist who have to catch the flight. Of course we are better, because we are sitting here thinking about whether we are better. We are in the period of reflection of what's gone wrong and what's gone right, and now we try to learn, because we are convinced that our ideas 20 years ago were very good ideas. And so I think you are right, we are getting better. And the other thing is, I think our Minister of Education said, I think 3 weeks ago, Edelgard Buhl-Mahn, she signed the Bologna Declaration. The idea was to bring people together, to make not only a big university in Europe, but to make clear that we will try to build up a culture, a European culture. And yesterday and this day, I learned a lot about our European culture, what is important for us and what is not so important, where are the differences and where are the things we think together, and I think this is important. And I thank you all for this inspiring experience. Thank you.
Very, very briefly answering your question, sir. Of course, I cannot say if we're better than 20 years ago, because I was 4 back then. But I must say, as a national representative of youth of Italy, that my generation is very demanding. There's the need for, we do feel the need, we do speak out, we're learning on how to speak up, and we all share this feeling and this necessity for an integration of what we do inside the university and outside the university. The number of working students is increasing, and we have this feeling that we do need to cross all of our activities. So I would say this is very positive.
I was also quite young 20 years ago, but I believe that we are better now. We had the topic of impact earlier today already. I think only within the last 10 years, when I was involved in higher education, there was quite a strong shift and more impact-oriented governmental funding also in higher education, also regarding impact on society. There's a long way ahead of us, but I think we have developed certain principles that we just have to follow up, and then we will also be better in 10 years. And of course, I also once again would like to emphasize we will also be better if we also look at new, more innovative ways on further developing the European higher education area.
You want to have the last word?
Comment on the question or in general? In general, I would say that we've all agreed that the higher education should embrace this responsiveness agenda to contribute to the societal needs in a clear way and have clear connections. My vision is that the Bologna process after 2020 will embrace community engagement, civic engagement, local mission of universities will be further developed, and I hope that by the ministerial meeting in Rome, that all these aspects will be somehow stressed, and that in the decade 2030 we will work more and we will discuss more on all these, I would say, new topics, community engagement, civic engagement, and local mission of university.
I think this is also a very good phrase to end the panel. Thank you very much. Thank all of you to being with me on the stage and sharing your thoughts, and thank you also for the audience and the questions from the audience. So, thank you.